This is Lunchtime Agenda.
Hello and welcome to Lunchtime Agenda. I'm Laura Jays, and today the government has chalked up its first parliamentary win. Just half an hour ago, the Greens and the Coalition voted to abolish the debt ceiling. But this may or may not be the last sitting week of this year, 2013, as Labor promises to provide roadblocks in the Senate for the big two, the repealing of the carbon tax and mining tax legislation. So that is one to watch. Also today, another nail in the coffin for Holden. There's now reports out of the United States backing what seems to be the inevitable, that General Motors intends to close 2 plants by 2016. And we are standing by to take you to a media conference here at Parliament House with the Greens' Andrew Wilkie and anti-pokies campaigner Tim Costello on legislation that's due to be voted on in the Senate shortly, well, by the end of the week, to repeal some poker machine reforms that were put in under the previous Labor government. To discuss all this today, joining me on my panel is Liberal MP Dan Tehan and Labor MP Stephen Jones. Now, I want to go first to this poker machine reform. Stephen Jones, first to you. I understand that the party is split over what to do here. What do you think the party should do?
Well, the party isn't split. We're yet to have a discussion on where we'll go with this, but I would say this: we're committed to ensuring that we address problem gambling in this country. The reforms that were put through the last Parliament, a very heated issue, I believe were modest reforms, and focus on this. The one thing that we are asking the poker machine operators, the poker machine manufacturers to do is put in place a system that enables voluntary pre-commitment. That is, somebody who's using that machine can set a limit on their bets. It's a pretty modest ask.
Okay.
I failed to see what all the noise is about.
We will go to that media conference now in the Senate courtyard and get Dan Tehan's response after that.
I'll let Tim make the introductions, but here to say that we are standing up for some of the most vulnerable people in the community, for those people who fall prey to Australian poker machines, which are some of the most aggressive machines anywhere in the world. And we have legislation on the books for the very first time, having the federal government involved in regulating poker machines here in Australia. It's important legislation. It was very hard fought. It was weaker than what all of us here would have liked, but it was something. Finally having the Australian government in the space of regulating the poker machines, which do so much damage to our community. And yet here we are facing government legislation to repeal what we fought very hard to achieve. And of course the opposition looking like at this stage it may support repeal of that legislation. Is about hypocrisy and courage. The hypocrisy of the government, who say that they want to return regulation of poker machines to the states where it belongs. Now, Minister Andrews has never supported the states exercising their own role when it comes to their rights and responsibilities. We have a bill in this place called the Andrews Bill, which sought to overturn the right of the Northern Territory on specific legislation around dying with dignity. That shows you how much respect Kevin Andrews has for the rights of the states and territories to exercise what is in their broad range of responsibilities. No, this is hypocrisy writ large. And on behalf of the government at this stage, the opposition at this stage, we say to them, please, please, stand for something. Show some courage. We work with many of you when you were the government to get this reform through. We worked very hard so that we'd finally have the Australian government in this space. Don't turn your back on communities now because the pokies industry is running a campaign against some of your members. Show some courage and ensure that you do what you're elected to do, and that is to stand up on behalf of some of those most vulnerable people. I'll just hand over to Andrew and Nick and John, and then we'll have Tim.
Yeah, and I'll be very brief because there's a number of us want to say a few words. Look, in essence, this government, the members of the government, simply do not care about Australia's 95,000 poker machine problem gamblers. Doesn't care that they're losing some $5,000 million a year on Australia's poker machines. Doesn't care that they are affecting hundreds of thousands of other people, mums, dads, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, friends, workmates, whilst in the workplace. This is an issue that affects, when you add it all up, well over 1 million Australians. So it escapes me why the new government is determined to try and overturn the modest poker machine reforms of the 43rd Parliament, reforms worth keeping. Look, frankly, many members of the government are hypocrites. You know, they go into the chamber every day and they start by bowing their heads and saying the Lord's Prayer. They talk about compassion and values, but when they're offered the opportunity to defend something that helps people, a great many people, they turn away. And I'll tell you why. They're on the take. The fact is that over recent years the poker machine industry has donated millions of dollars to the Labor Party, the Liberal Party and other parties. And I tell you what, it's turned out to be a pretty good investment for them. They're seeing the return on that investment at the moment in the 44th Parliament, with the government seeking to overturn the modest poker machine reforms. The fact that the Labor Party did not vote against the bill last week in the House of Representatives. I can only hope that when the bill when the question is put in the Senate, that the Labor Party will do its best to defend those reforms. There's a lot of things come out of this episode, one of which is the pressing need for reform of the whole political donation issue. Because regrettably, we live in a country where we think we're pure, we think we have a good regulatory framework, we think there is not a corruption of governance. But the reality is big money buys votes in this place, and we saw it in the House of Representatives last week.
Poker machine policy is a litmus test of good government. If a government is willing to rake in tax dollars off the backs of the vulnerable and the addicted, and when we know that it's not just family breakups, it's suicides, it's the devastation it causes across the whole community, then there's something seriously wrong. Let's put this in perspective. According to the Productivity Commission, over 100,000 severe problem gamblers, almost 300,000 people well on the way to becoming a pathological problem gambler, each problem gambler affecting the lives of 7 others. This is a big issue around the country, and at the risk of offending some of the journalists here with my language, I said the last time that the former government's reforms were piss weak. Well, what this government is doing is even worse, because they're actually turning their back on problem gamblers completely and washing their hands of the problem. That's just simply not good enough. This issue won't go away. There have been a lot of cynical manoeuvrings that have been going on between the major parties, and it's important that we actually take a stand and say this issue is important. This issue affects literally hundreds of thousands of Australians, and we need to take a stand and say what this government is planning to do is simply wrong. Go to John Madigan.
We're calling on the government to have some spine, to have some ticker. We've got an industry that talks about philanthropy in the community. This is philanthropy that is based and taken from the most vulnerable in our society. How many lives of individuals, families, the community are to be destroyed before the government takes some initiative here in good faith with the people? You know, we've got no money for hospitals, we've got no money for roads, we are creating a problem. We talk about mental health, we talk about alcohol and drug abuse, we talk about vandalism in the community, and yet we allow this to continue. This creates an enormous social problem. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed now. And for God's sake, show some ticker, show some backbone, and bloody well do something.
Thanks, John. I'm Tim Costello. I'm the chair of the Australian Church's Gambling Task Force, and I'm a Baptist minister. We have with us Calvin Alley from the Salvation Army, Marion from Uniting Care representing the Uniting Church, and Jackie from the Australian Catholic Social Services representing the Catholic Church. All the churches in Australia are on a unity ticket saying this damage must stop. It was my brother Peter Costello, remember him? He actually had courage bringing on the first Productivity Commission report in 1999, and it showed that Australia has 20.4% of all the world's pokies. John Howard was shocked. He said, "I'm ashamed," but he said, "Oh, it's a state's matter." The states did nothing about this damage. So Kevin Rudd, who said, "I hate the pokies," reconvened the Productivity Commission report. Its findings came out in 2010. The same report saying the damage is enormous, and Australia has the highest per capita gambling problems anywhere in the world by a long stretch. So these very mild reforms, limits on ATMs of $250, warning signals, just like tobacco on warnings on tobacco packs, cigarette packs, a ability to actually set a limit, a voluntary limit, now being pulled away. Why? Because both sides are captured by the pokies lobby. And this is devastating for the public. The Sydney Morning Herald's survey last year showed that 81% of the public...
Tim Costello there, but certainly a coalition of characters lining up against the repeal of this legislation. Dan Tehan said that this... Tim Costello just said that this is all about vested interests and them really being in control, and the state's really being beholden to the revenue that comes out of pokie machines.
Well, I don't see that as correct. I mean, I come from Victoria. The Victorian state government have put in place good laws here, and what I think we need to do is see whether we can get the rest of the states to roll that out. But we shouldn't have the federal government intervening, putting more regulation in place. What we need to see is each state government understanding that we need to tackle this issue and putting the laws in place to do that.
Why not have the federal government intervene here? Because essentially what is being proposed on the other side is just to have more self-regulation from the industry. Isn't that just putting the fox in charge of the hen house?
Well, not really. I mean, it's been proven that the regulation doesn't work. No one's quite sure how to do it, how to go about it. The states are trying to deal with it. Why should the Commonwealth come in and intervene and put another layer of regulation? Let's the states work this out. That's where the responsibility lies in this area, and that's where I think we need to go, and we need to be saying to each state government, you need to take what action you see necessary in this area.
This is a contentious issue in the last Parliament, Stephen Jones. Some of your colleagues just simply don't want to have a fight with the industry. What would you say to them?
Yeah, look, a couple of things I want to say. Firstly, Andrew Wilkie does himself no favours by suggesting people are on the take, and that's his language, pretty offensive. I can say exactly how much money I've taken from the industry, zero. I come to this with an understanding about what the public interest needs. Now, last year, Tony Abbott said he supported voluntary pre-commitment. The bill that they are trying to overturn does nothing more than facilitate voluntary pre-commitment. And if you want a uniform approach, you've got to do it from the National Parliament. Otherwise, you have a ridiculous situation where you can drive 10 kilometres across the Queensland border, have one system in place in Queensland, another system in place in New South Wales. It won't work. The federal parliament is the best place to deal with it, and it should. OK, let's move on to the issue of Holden that has been bubbling away for some days now. We now look at reports in the United States that these reports are coming from GM, from unnamed sources once again, but it does look inevitable. But Dantine, it's fair to say that there is a philosophical difference and debate going on in the coalition at the moment. Do you see Holden shutting up as inevitable, and are you one of those who doesn't want to see any more money thrown at Holden?
Well, it does seem, sadly, that Holden is now on life support, and what we need to hear from General Motors is what are their plans, because they need to make a clear statement of what they've got in mind for the car-making industry here in Australia, because if they keep going like they are, we're all going to be in the dark about this. The federal government has stepped in and is trying to help the car industry here. We're trying to get rid of the carbon tax. We got rid of the $1.8 billion fringe benefit tax hit that the previous Labor government wanted to put on. We want to see it survive.
But you're also pulling $500 million a year out of the automotive transformation scheme. Wouldn't that help?
Well, we can't go on subsidising the industry continually. In the end, it's got to learn to stand on its own 2 feet. Every other industry in Australia, or other industries in Australia, have to do that, and the car industry should be the same. We've said to them, this is the consistent policy approach we're going to take. You can rely on that. We're not like the previous Labor government, which put in place schemes and then took them away. We've said this is the approach that we will take. Now it's up to General Motors in the US to make a decision. OK, what are their long-term plans plans for the car industry here in Australia.
Okay, Stephen Jones, Labor's argument throughout the last few days has been there's not a car in the world that's not subsidised in some way by government. Using Germany as an example, though, they have the export market, the volume. The difference is it's more difficult for, particularly in those two aspects, for Australia, and it's not quite sustainable. If you speak to guys like John Camillo and some of the workers there, they accept that it's difficult for Australia to really ramp up production when you're looking at the export market. So what's the answer?
Sure. Look, Labor in government said we were willing to support and did support the car industry, but the car industry in return has got to make cars that people want to buy both here and overseas. We can't survive on a domestic market alone. We need to have an export market. We all agree on that. I agree with Ian Macfarlane when he says he wants the government to support a domestic car industry. I just hope the rest of his caucus colleagues agree with him as well. We know that there is a big blue going on inside the coalition at the moment. We know that this is effectively a get square for the GrainCorp decision because they blew their economic credibility. They spent all their coin by bailing out GrainCorp for the Nationals.
On Holden though, is it too
and they're
late?
Trying to muscle
is it too late? Looking at the reports coming out of the United States today, this government's only been in power for 3 months. Surely Holden's been talking about this, or GM's been talking about this for some time.
Yeah, look, there is no doubt that Holden, like every other international car maker, is looking at its global platforms and where it does its work.
But it's
is
not
there
only
any wonder?
They're not only shutting down in Australia, it's also their South Korea production, also Germany. So this is not just isolated to Australia. Would you agree?
Look, what I understand, and I take Ian Macfarlane at his word on this, is that Holden haven't made a decision yet. They need to get a clear indication from the government that they are willing to talk and they're willing to come to the table. They're getting a lot of mixed messages at the moment.
Dan Tehan, what about the South Australian election coming up? This is not good timing.
No, but we can't be held to ransom on these decisions by the electoral cycle. What we have to do is what's in the nation's industry, and we've told the car industry very plainly what we will provide in assistance to them, and we made it clear before the election. So it's now beholden on us to say to General Motors, OK, it's your time to make a decision. It's your time to decide what are your plans for the industry here, and we really need General Motors to come out and make a clear statement about their plans.
That's not quite true. It's not quite true. You're hanging everything on the Productivity Commission report coming down in a fortnight's time. So the existing $370 million that's available to the car industry, another $50 million that's available to the component sector, that's all up for grabs if the Productivity Commission report doesn't find in their favour, and they haven't been big supporters of car industry support in the past.
Well, that's not what we're hearing out of the US at the moment. What we're hearing out of the US at the moment is that General Motors have made their decisions and they're not waiting for what we're doing here in Australia. Now, if that is the case, then they need to make that very clear.
All right, I quickly want to move on to Qantas. This has been also another dual issue. Dan Tehan, should the government inject equity into Qantas? Is that something that you are philosophically opposed to, or should it be on the table, at least as a negotiation?
Well, I don't think it would be a sensible course of action to take. I think the better thing that we could do is look at the Qantas Sale Act. Obviously, we have Virgin competing here in the Australian market. It has overseas investors in its operations. I think that that's the part of the operation we need to look at when it comes to Qantas. I think we need to have the debate around the Sale Act. We need to see whether there are potentially foreign airlines that might like to invest in Qantas, and I think that's the best way to go. We just can't keep providing money to industries because, as we've seen, we're potentially going to have $430 billion in gross debt. That will be the peak. At some stage, we've got to start saying to all industries, it's time to start standing on your own 2 feet.
Stephen Jones, the Sale Act, this has been, it looks like, one of the big issues, and Alan Joyce, in his interview in David Spears' interview with him the other day, said that perhaps there needs to be a change in the Sale Act where Virgin is included in that as well. Is that something Labor would consider? We support,
our position is quite clear. We support the Sale Act as it stands. And can I address the issue that you've asked, Dan? I think it's a little bit strange that we've got a domestic airline that is in part owned by a foreign government in Australia, yet we would take off the table the Australian government having some equity in Qantas. I mean, you've recently given $8 billion to the Reserve Bank and asked nothing in return. Why not have an equity stake in Qantas and get a return as any other shareholder would? It would be a good investment.
But one of the issues as well, as Alan Joyce saying, it's an unlevel playing field. The issue of foreign investment, well, at the moment, under the Sale Act, Qantas can go up to 49%. They're nowhere near that. So why is this even on the table, Dan?
Well, there are restrictions. So what we need to do is have a look at those restrictions and see whether they are the things which are preventing foreign airlines from coming in and saying, yes, we want to invest in Qantas, or it might be foreign companies that want to come in and invest in Qantas. This is the discussion and debate we need to have. There's a 25% cap on foreign ownership as a part of that 49%. We need to look at that. We need to look at creative ways to get capital into Australia. We can't just sit back and expect the capital to come from within. We've always been a net importer of capital, and we have to look at creative ways to keep bringing that into this country. Otherwise, our industries are going to suffer. Like
knocking off the sale of Grant Corp. That was a pretty creative way of getting foreign investment into the country, saying we're open for business, but not you.
We will get to Grant Corp, but look, the government is seeking bipartisan support today for an agriculture white paper. Is the bipartisanship there?
Well, look, Joel Fitzgibbon, our spokesperson on this, has already said we offer bipartisan support. Our previous spokesperson in this area, when we were in government, of course, published the white paper on food. We think that there is tremendous opportunities, tremendous challenges for Australia in this area, but we can be a provider of food, particularly protein, to the burgeoning middle class of our region. We should ensure we're well placed to do that.
But Dan Tehan, why do we need another white paper? It seems like we've had a lot of white papers in this area. Looking at the Asian Century white paper, this was all included. What do we not know that this white paper is going to produce?
Can I first just say it's terrific that the Labor Party have come on board, and this will be a bipartisan approach, because I think it's very important. I think what we need to see is a bit more vision for agriculture in this nation, and that's what the white paper sets out to do. So I think it'll be a little bit different to the other white papers that we've seen, in that we really want this to set out a clear vision as to where agriculture in this nation can be in 15, in 30 years. And that's what I think Barnaby Joyce is setting out to do. I commend him from doing that, and he's already put some really interesting ideas on the table with regards to that. But do mum and dad
farmers need to be more open to foreign investment?
There's no doubt that the agriculture sector, full stop, needs to be more open to foreign investment. We need capital. That's every report that's been done on the sector shows that. What we have to do, though, is be creative in how we do that. What we have to enable is mum and dad farmers to be able to bring capital into their businesses themselves, and that's one of the things that Barnaby has suggested in what he's had to say today. Is that's one of the things that it will look at, and I really think that that's encouraging.
The farmers in our nation, Stephen Jones, are looking at debt overall of about $60 billion. Is this something that you think the public is comfortable with, more foreign investment in mum and dad farms?
Look, since Australia was settled by white people, we've relied on foreign capital in the agricultural sector and in every other sector. I don't think it helps to advocate that economic reality in public when you've got members of the government going around running their economic xenophobia lines. You know, some foreign investment is good, some foreign investment is bad. Don't invest in this sector, do invest in that.
That's
consistent
right,
message
isn't it?
needs
There
to come
hasn't
across.
been a consistent message on this. Barnaby Joyce's resistance to, I think, at least foreign investment in agriculture and farming hasn't always been so strong. So is he on the same page as what you're saying today?
Oh, look, I think so. We've always had scrutiny on foreign investment, whether it be, you know, oil and gas industry, whether it be the Australian Stock Exchange, whether it be key agricultural assets. So I think it's a bit rich to say that, you know, we don't have this type of scrutiny across all sectors. What we do need to realise, though, is that for our agriculture sector to produce for what's going to happen in Asia in the next 10 to 15 years, we need capital to do that. And what we have to do is look at the ways we can do that. Now, I thought Barnaby was very good in saying that maybe we need to get more capital from the city into our agricultural sector. Obviously, there were some decisions taken by the previous Labor government which stopped that. I think we need now to look at whether there needs to be changes in that regard.
So when we look to the free trade agreements, Stephen Jones, China is obviously the next big one. Should the threshold of FIRB be a negotiating point when coming to that free trade agreement? Should that be an area in which the government and Barnaby Joyce should be giving in?
No, look, I don't think so. I think FIRB has served us well. It gives the government, the national government, an opportunity to run a national interest test across foreign investment.
But it is higher for China.
What matters more is that we put in place good bilateral relationship and that there is certainty in investment decisions. And that's why I keep coming back to GrainCorp. You can't put the open for business sign up and say foreign investment, we want you here, and particularly want you here in the agricultural sector, and say, but not on this one because my National Party must not like
wrong
it.
or right decision on GrainCorp, but either way you look at it, it has put Australia one step back when it comes to the view the world has of Australia when it comes to foreign investment.
Well, Stephen was just talking about the importance of FIRB, and FIRB was split on that decision. So I think we need to face the facts on it. What I'd look to is the free trade agreement with South Korea.
Open for business, still in flashing lights though?
Well, after the South Korean FTA, yes, absolutely. And we'll get FTAs with Japan and we'll get FTAs with China. So this government
What about that issue of China and negotiating the free trade agreement, whether the FIRB threshold should be a negotiating point or something that Nick Barnaby and Tony Abbott are willing to give on?
Well, the Trade Minister, Andrew Robb, I think did an outstanding job in his negotiations with South Korea. Obviously, he was able to get a carve-out on agriculture when it came to investment, but he was also able to get the limit lifted to over 1,000 million when it came to other industries. So I think you'll see that type of creativity from Andrew Robb again when it comes to Japan and potentially with China.
Okay, I quickly just want to ask Stephen Jones about the Ocean Protector. The Japanese whaling fleet has left for the Southern Ocean, but look, whether a customs vessel will go to oversee that, it's not quite clear. The Minister's office says the situation will be monitored. Do we really need a customs vessel on the Southern Ocean at this point?
Well, when we were in government, we said no. We didn't, and we got pilloried for it by Greg Hunt and others. I remember them in Parliament, throwing every bomb they could at us for not sending a boat down there. So this is a clear case of them saying one thing last year before the election and retreating from it at a rate of not.
No, we said we'd supervise. That's what we're going to be doing. It is, and that's what we're going to be doing. Greg Hunt's made that clear.
Not quite sending the Ocean Protector though. Dan Tehan, Stephen Jones, thanks so much for joining us on Lunchtime Agenda today. Now we go to one of the last question times.